My name's Craig Harvey. I am the former Chief of Operations for the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner Coroner's Office. I retired in 2015, and I worked there for 28 years before I retired. The chief is responsible for coroner investigations and other things.
So the medical examiner would work under you, for example, right?
No.
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 Okay.
Medical examiners are up here on the food chain.
Okay, so over you.
At the time I was working, we had approximately 50 cases a day come in, reported to the coroner.
And what's the criteria? Because not every death obviously has to be investigated by the coroner. What was the criteria for you getting a case?
Basically, the coroner's responsible for any unnatural death, and that includes, accident, suicide, homicide. We get the occasional undetermined, and those are our responsibility to flesh out. In addition to the natural deaths. The natural deaths can occur in people very young as well as people very old.
Sure. Yeah, we know each other originally through our mutual friend Scott Michaels, who has Dearly Departed tours and Dearly Departed, his YouTube channel now.
Yes.
And we did 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, which was my first true documentary about the Mansons. And you provided technical feedback. You went over the autopsy results from some of the Manson victims and kind of gave us. That's where I learned what the word exsanguination means. Mm-hmm. Bled to death.
Bled to death. Yes. Yeah. I resonate with the Manson murders because growing up in Los Angeles, that was something that was on the TV every day, and it was just fascinating to me. And then when I got to see Dr. Tom Noguchi come on TV and talk about the murders themselves and what have you, it definitely piqued my interest.
And for the people who don't know, what is the Noguchi's significance?
From 1967 to 1982, Dr. Thomas Noguchi was the chief medical examiner coroner for the County of Los Angeles. And he ultimately, right or wrong, got the title of Coroner to the Stars because there were some very high-profile cases that came in while he was in charge of the office.
Yeah, so Noguchi, he did Marilyn Monroe's autopsy. Yep. That's one of the most famous ones he was a part of.
Right.
Which is kind of what got him that moniker, I think, right?
Yeah. He left the office before I arrived. Interesting factoid. Any picture you see of Miss Monroe on an examination table or whatever, those pictures were not taken by the coroner. They were taken by the law enforcement agency before we restricted who could take pictures in the Forensic Science Center.
Well, that raises a really interesting point with my channel, which is Biggie and Tupac focused these days, and that is that there's a very infamous photo of Tupac post-autopsy, and he's got the Y incision still in his chest.
Right.
And he's laying on the table, and that was leaked.
Yes.
To a journalist in Las Vegas, a woman named Kathy Scott.
Uh-huh.
And she published it in a book. She was the first person to publish a book on Tupac's murder, and she was the one that put that out there.
I was shocked when I got it, and the person said, "Here it is." Here, and I don't know what the motive was behind the person. I didn't ask any questions. It was a pretty graphic photo and clear.
And it's very controversial because on one hand, it helped dispel for a lot of people the myth that Tupac was still alive. Because It kind of became like Elvis, people thinking Elvis was still alive. There's a lot of people that still think Tupac's still alive. But seeing him on the table for most people was convincing enough. Okay, he's dead. But also very controversial because it shouldn't have been released. And she has never disclosed who gave it to her.
So you've got people who have access, taking cameras. There were like 4 cameras in that room. So you have different kinds of film. So you've got people taking cameras, and so not just one camera took photos of him.
If something like that were to get leaked from your department, because I think in Vegas there was a big investigation internally into who did it, and people were reprimanded.
In our office, my experience is any time that there's a coroner photo, a scene photo, an autopsy room photo that appears in the media, those are generally received by people who have access to the files that we're required by law to release to attorneys for defense purposes, etc. So like there's a picture of Mr. Michael Jackson that is out there, and that, while it might have been taken here at the coroner's office, wasn't released by the coroner. It was released by an attorney. We used to allow law enforcement to take pictures willy-nilly in the facility. And then after a while, we saw that there's a problem there. And the problem was mostly legal, because we would take photos within the Forensic Science Center. And then the detective takes a photo within the Forensic Science Center. But then the detective attaches his photos to his report, and they go in the murder book, which goes into court. And so then we come in with our written files plus the photographs that we took, and there'll be a difference. And then all of a sudden everybody's up in arms over why is this picture different than this picture. So that's when we said, no mas, you can't do that anymore. If you need a picture taken, detective, you ask our photographer, we'll take the photo for you and make sure that you have it. Because they're going to get a copy of all our photos anyway. But the problem was when things are different, the court has a problem with that.
Yep, of course. And while we're on the subject of Tupac, and the theories that he's still alive, how would it be impossible? Because it all hinges on that was a body double. That wasn't really him. That was someone that looked like him. So aside from the absurdity that you would find a lookalike like Tupac, kill him, put him on the and have him autopsied, how does a coroner confirm identities?
Generally, identities are confirmed by fingerprints, which are considered pretty solid identifications. Depending on the circumstances, sometimes lack of identifiability, we would use dental records, we would use body x-rays, and those kinds of things to do it. But most of the time it's done by fingerprints, and that's considered pretty reliable.
And so you always confirm identity, you don't just take
Every what we call a special processing case, which is a homicide, the fingerprints are taken and the cards are sent to DOJ, and then hopefully we get a hit back on those. Over the course of time, we started using new technology called live scan. And so what we live scanned at the coroner's office went directly to everybody, LAPD, LA Sheriff, DOJ, Sacramento. So everybody was getting the same thing, and that's how most of the identities were confirmed.
So in other words, the Clark County coroner in Las Vegas would not just take it on faith, oh, this is Tupac. Most likely. I mean, maybe, you don't work for them, so.
Right. Well, maybe if you were tired of being with medical examiner's office, you might take that position. But the coroner is legally responsible for the identification. I'm talking California.
Sure.
Legally responsible for the identification. It's not Tupac Shakur until we say it's Tupac Shakur.
Right. So to people that might be watching this that might still think Tupac is still alive, highly unlikely, unless the entire medical examiner staff was paid off as part of all the dozens of other people that would had to have been paid off,
right,
to do this.
But you're right; it's highly unlikely that he's still alive.
Right.
They kind of did the same thing with Michael Jackson.
Oh, really? You had to deal with that?
Yeah. And then when we get to Michael Jackson, I'll tell you
Okay,
that little tidbit.
I brought a copy of Biggie's autopsy report over here with me, and that is public information. It was released years ago, so I'm not leaking anything that people haven't seen before or that isn't accessible yet. But I wanted to go through it with you because, first of all, you were there when Biggie was killed. You
Yes.
remember that. Do you remember anything from that case?
Well, the only thing I remember is that when it was reported, he had been taken to a hospital, and that changes how we generally respond to those types of cases. So there's no reason to go to the scene because the scene's been destroyed. So we just sent one of our transport folks out to
Cedars-Sinai.
And Mr. Garcia went out to Cedars-Sinai and picked up the body and brought it back in and processed him into the facility. And then Lieutenant McWillie picked up the case because it was a high-profile case, and she created what we call a cover sheet or a Form 1. What we're left with is just Dr. Lisa Scheinen's autopsy report and all of the lab reports and consults, et cetera, that went through before they finally closed the case out with a cause of death.
And you talk about Lieutenant McWillie. What was her position? She's not a homicide detective. She is a detective with the coroner.
She's an investigator supervisor with the LA County Coroner. We use titles such as lieutenant and captain with our upper level supervisory staff, only because when we take phone calls from like law enforcement and you say, this is Lieutenant McWillie, they know exactly where they're talking to in the organization.
So what does Biggie's autopsy report tell you?
Primarily, it tells us what his final cause of death was, and the opinion of the pathologist who did the examination.
And his report is 97 pages long. Is that standard?
No, that is not standard. That's a long one.
Why would this one have been longer, do you think?
Probably because of the circumstances surrounding. When you have somebody, it's not one-on-one known combatants with each other. When people just suddenly get shot, assassinated, whatever you want to call it, that changes the complexion a little bit. And so you want to do more rather than less. And that's why sometimes doctors will order things that may be on a routine homicide, if there is such a thing, but on a routine homicide, they may not do X, Y, Z. But for something like this, when somebody is shot out of the blue like that, they'll say, oh no, pull out all the stops. We're going to look at everything here.
Okay. Well, why don't you go through it and just tell me what you see. It's tough to handle this in a respectful way and to not seem exploitative, but I also know people are interested in knowing the specifics about, especially a case like this one.
All right. Well, the final cause of death was established as a gunshot wound to the abdomen-chest. And the other conditions, which is things that might not directly relate to the death of the person in terms of what was fatal, they indicate that there was a multiple non-fatal wounds on the body. And then in the autopsy report, Dr. Sheinin will break that down, and depending on how many projectiles she recovers at autopsy, she'll identify each one, where it was recovered from, and then also outline what was damaged by that bullet, because bullets sometimes travel through other organs and do a lot of damage on their way to their final destination.
Sure.
So she's got multiple gunshot wounds. The fourth gunshot wound is an abdomen to chest trajectory, penetrating and deemed to be the fatal wound. So perforating injuries to things like the ascending colon, the liver, right hemidiaphragm, pericardium, heart and upper lobe of the left lung, and the bullet was recovered from the left shoulder area.
Yeah, so that's hard to survive that.
Yeah. And again, I said earlier, the bullets don't always go straight to the kill zone.
Right.
They travel through things, and sometimes the traveling through will increase the lethality of the gunshot wound rather than its final destination.
Sure.
And then she goes on into other findings, and these are mostly, natural death types of things, morbid obesity.
Yeah,
I mean, if that's stuff you want to get into.
Yeah, he was 395 pounds, it says, at the end there.
Cardiomegaly with biventricular hypertrophy.
What does that mean?
Enlarged heart. Status post left femoral fracture with placement of orthopedic rod remote.
Yeah, so he was in a serious car accident about 6 months before he was killed. And they had to put a rod in his leg from that. So that's why in his that last night he was alive, he was walking with a cane for that reason. He wasn't very mobile. I think the doctors said that they figured he died within a couple minutes probably of being shot based on the wounds that, he was probably already dead by the time they brought him to the hospital. And he was declared dead pretty shortly thereafter. I mean, they worked on him, but
right.
Within like 30 minutes of the shooting, he was declared dead. So it was not much they could do for him.
Right. The best people on the planet.
Yeah.
Emergency room staff.
Right.
They work their butts off for you.
There are some photos of Biggie after he was killed that are online. I have all of his autopsy photos, or a bunch of them. I would never share them. But I think some of the ones that are online, they show still some of the tubes from the hospital still, taped to his face and stuff like that. Why would that still be on there when it comes to you?
Well, the coroner asked that once a person's been pronounced dead, nobody is allowed to touch the body or do anything with the body. And there are interesting stories about how we have to bring people to Jesus about. That's the law. It's not some arbitrary rule that we've created. And the reason being is that sometimes the placement of a tube may not be where you think it is. And sometimes something might have more of a role to play in the death than what was originally thought. So that's why we say don't pull out the IV lines, leave the IV lines. You can clamp them, whatever you need to do, but leave everything there so the doctor can, because it can be photographed, and then the doctor can evaluate it each step individually so that they know exactly what they're dealing with here in this particular person.
Because there's always, I guess, the possibility that something that happened at the hospital contributed.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. What the coroner euphemistically calls a therapeutic misadventure.
The doctor messed up.
Doctor killed him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is not the case with Biggie, but that
No.
Yeah.
But it does happen, not very often, but.
Do you remember anything else from Biggie's murder? Do you remember anything with dealing with the media, or did you have to? Because by then you were the chief.
I was
investigator.
But I think out the gate, I think LAPD put a security hold on the case. And back then, a security hold was a simple phone call from the detective saying, could you put a security hold on this? And we'd say, yeah, no problem.
And that means you don't talk to the press?
We don't talk to the press. We refer them to the law enforcement agency for any information. So now we require they go to court and get a court order sealing the case, because some media outlets challenged us on our security hold policy because it wasn't, in stone or whatever. It was simply a gentleman's agreement that we would not release information until the law enforcement agency had the opportunity to continue their case, develop their leads, and reach a point where we're all ready to start off on the same foot.
Right. One thing that jumped out at me about Biggie was they found no alcohol or drugs present. And of course he was a enthusiastic, weed smoker. And he's at a party that night where champagne is, everybody's drinking. It's interesting to me that his
what were the findings of the lab?
I think it was nothing.
Everything not detected.
The fact that, is marijuana on the list?
No, we don't generally test for marijuana.
Well, there you go. That's more what he was into, I think.
You don't die from marijuana, you die from walking into the bus.
That's interesting. So you don't check toxicology, you only check for things that can kill you.
Drugs of abuse is what we test for.
So there's cocaine on there, negative, of course. Alcohol, people can obviously drink themselves to death from alcohol poisoning. But marijuana you can't die from, so you would not test for that. That's interesting. I never realized that.
Yeah, unless you walk in front of a bus while you're high, it's not a cause of death.
Important.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And if he was high or not, it had nothing to do with him getting shot to death. So.
Right.
So these are always interesting to me, the drawings.
The diagrams?
Yeah, and the diagrams. And that's page 22.
They come pre-printed with the human figures on there, and then the medical examiner will write in the corners or on the margins here, and they'll write down what their observations are, and they'll identify basically like by number, like number 4 bullet, number 2 bullet, and so forth. That will correspond with the dictation of the report into its final form.
Got it.
She also marks on the diagram the direction of travel for the bullets.
Right.
You see there.
Yep. This is interesting. So you have vital signs here with what looks like times next to them. So it looks like the first vital sign on here, and this I assume is from the hospital, is at 12:46 a.m. And then the final vital sign is taken at, it looks like 1:12 a.m. And it scribbles by its pulse, and it looks like he just wrote zeros.
Yeah, it's just they've a 0 with a slash through it. No blood pressure, no pulse.
So he just arrived with no blood pressure, no pulse, and they never
Yeah.
got anything, it looks like, from that.
Yeah, he was in VFib when he got there.
What does that mean?
Ventricular fibrillation. It's the heart wasn't in its normal cardiac rhythm.
Okay.
And
so that just shows that he was, what they would say, dead on arrival in layman's terms, and they never got any vital out of him. They
Right,
never
that's
were
what it
able to
looks
get
like.
a pulse or anything at any point while they worked on him for close to half an hour. Wow. I see this as an intercardiac massage. Is that when they reach in and massage the heart?
yeah.
Wow.
We're getting some breaking news coming into the situation right now from about Michael Jackson, the king of pop, who's 50 years old. Let's go to Deborah Farrick. She's working the story for us. What are we picking up, Deb?
Well, Wolf, here's what we can tell you. This is what's being reported by KTLA. Apparently, Michael Jackson suffered cardiac arrest this afternoon.
Well, we do know that he's been in Los Angeles preparing to undertake this major concert event that he was scheduled to perform in London this coming summer.
I have to stop you for a second, AJ. CNN can now confirm from the LA coroner that Michael Jackson is dead.
So we just talked about Biggie. Probably the next most famous case, if not even more famous case than that one in your time there at the medical examiner's office, is the death of Michael Jackson.
Yes.
What do you remember from that whole situation?
I remember quite a bit because it was what it was. So in this case, the initial tip-off to us that this was occurring was from LA City Fire Brian Humphrey, who was a PIO.
What's that?
Public Information Officer.
Okay.
So he called and gave us a heads up. Said Michael Jackson's just been taken to UCLA Medical Center and he's not doing great and just wanted you guys to get a heads up. The first thing that we did is I had my assistant chief, Ed Winter, and then we selected one of our top investigators, the great Alyssa Fleek, and they rolled out to the hospital to begin the investigation there. So he'd been pronounced, and Dr. Murray had also come to the ER at the same time.
And that was the doctor, for people who don't remember, that was
the
with
doctor
him.
who was with Michael Jackson in his home on Carrollwood, I believe it was, and was the person responsible for administering the drugs, the propofol. So he came to the ER, and then he tried to kind of make himself smaller and smaller and smaller. And
I was just there, man.
yeah, so so that was kind of interesting. That I don't know what he would necessarily bring to the table when you got one of the finest ERs in LA is trying to take care of this person and bring them back to some sense of stability.
Yeah, and UCLA Medical is fantastic.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah, I mean they're, LAC USC gets a bad rep sometimes, but if I was going to go in some place, that UCLA would be right up there with my places to go to.
There, and probably Cedars would be up there too.
Cedars
was Biggie.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, he gets pronounced, and we make arrangements to transport him to the office. We have our transport fleet there, and they're going to move him down here. So he comes down to the office, and we start our normal procedure. The investigator does the report. I don't even think her report was finished when they scheduled him for autopsy. But it was, again, what we've talked about earlier, getting them examined and out of the building as soon as possible.
Right.
So I think the report probably followed, but the homicide detectives would show up on the day of the autopsy, and I think we wanted him done the next day. So that's what we were working on. So anyway, we did the examination, and as you might suspect, we have no cause of death yet because everything's going to hinge on the toxicology and then the interpretation of the toxicology. What does that mean to Mr. Jackson? So that was coming down the pike, and it's going to be weeks away. And so then it was time to release the body, and the family had selected Forest Lawn, as the Handley mortuary. So I was tasked, I contacted Forest Lawn, and I said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is the Jackson family has selected Forest Lawn to handle the services for Mr. Jackson. The bad news is you have to take him right now, because we wanted him out of the building so that we could get back to normal. The media presence at the coroner's office was just intense. And if you're not, you're kind of familiar with the layout of the office where the loading ramp is, and there's a gate right there. And we had media people staking out that gate, and they were stopping coroner vans, leaving, coming, asking them, do you have Michael Jackson? Is that Michael Jackson? You know, everybody wanted to be the first to know. And so what we did is once we got Forest Lawn's consent to transport him to the mortuary, we set up a van to move him, and it was just like undercover kind of thing. It was just like, we're just going to take him over there and deliver him to Forest Lawn, and they can take care of him from there. But that was interesting. I'm glad the family was ready to do that. There was going to be no argument over where he was going to go. I mean,
right.
They couldn't have picked probably a finer mortuary business in the county. But when you talk about strange things that happen, and you talk about a body double for Tupac Shakur, suddenly on the internet there's this video, and the video shows a coroner van, and it drives into a subterranean parking lot, and then it parks near a door, and then the doors open, and a living Michael Jackson steps out and goes inside this building. So from that point on, it's like, he's not really dead, is he? He lives. And everybody would like that to be the case, but that wasn't the case. So that media caught on, and then the Board of Supervisors caught on, and they were livid because as far as they were concerned, they were seeing a coroner's van being driven and some sort of staged event taking place, and somehow the coroner was responsible for it. And what we found out as we started looking into this thing, it was actually produced, I believe, by a company in Germany. And they had taken photographs and created graphics of how our vans were painted and outfitted and what have you. So they created their own Ford Econoline with a blue stripe and the word coroner, et cetera, like that. They created that themselves, and then they found a Michael Jackson impersonator or whatever, and the rest is kind of history. And they were like so angry that we were doing this. Like, it's not us. This is the insanity of the media interest in this case that's doing this kinds of stuff. We're just, and I point out, we try to get back to business as soon as we can, but now I'm tracking down who these people are and where they're at and where did this video come from and stuff like that. So it was just a little hitch in the giddy up, but a lot of folks don't know that was, they may still not know that video was bogus, but
sure,
it was.
Yeah, it's Biggie's murder has been recreated multiple times for various productions, and one of the most common photos I see that's supposed to be from the scene of the crime, I know, is a screenshot from one of the scripted shows that was done. The people you see are actors. The bullet holes in the door are fake.
Right.
But I've seen it even appear in documentaries.
So in the investigation of Michael Jackson's death, I went to the house on Carrollwood with Assistant Chief Winter, and we looked at the bedroom and opened cabinets and drawers and stuff like that. And one of the responsibilities of the coroner is to recover medical evidence. So every bottle of pills, every full or empty bottle of propofol, any other drug that was being used to maintain Michael Jackson in that sedated state, we took possession of and brought it in as medical evidence. And then in the course of the investigation, the law enforcement agency wanted to fingerprint the bottles to see who handled them. Dr. Murray, because there was an assertion at some point that Michael Jackson did it himself. He administered the drug. So that was left to us to try to figure out. So we ended up going back to Forest Lawn, Glendale, and this is after Michael's services and stuff. And we had them pull the body. He hadn't been interred yet.
Oh, wow.
We had them pull the casket out and open the casket. And, we did this with the full knowledge of the Jackson family and, Catherine Jackson, and we worked mostly with LaToya. They were the most wonderful people and understanding and helpful of us trying to resolve what's happened here.
Right.
So what our mission was is to do palm prints of Michael Jackson. So when they printed the jars of medication or whatever, they can compare to whatever palm prints
to see who had handled that medication, him
who
or
had
Murray.
handled,
Right.
Exactly. On most homicides, we would do fingerprints and palm prints and stuff like that. That's normal. But because this wasn't a homicide at that particular juncture, it was just an accident. And so, but we had to go do that. So
Wow.
It was just interesting, and I'm thankful the Jackson family was so understanding.
Yeah. On my trips to the coroner's offices, I remember there was a special area for celebrity bodies, basically. There was like a separate, because there's the main crypt,
Right.
which I remember it's like a real house of horrors if you're not used to it. I remember walking in there myself and just daring myself, how far into this room full of 80 dead bodies could I make myself walk?
80? You were there on a light day.
It probably was a light day. It might have been over 100, I remember.
Yeah, I would probably guess it was. Yeah.
People think that they're in like the black body bags. They're not. They're loosely wrapped in a clear plastic sheet, basically with twine or kind of thin rope,
thin rope
tying around them. But you can see that they are bodies. You can see them through the clear plastic. But then there was a separate, much smaller room that I was told is where celebrities like Michael Jackson would be held, because I guess it's extra security, or?
Yeah, we called those security crypts.
Okay.
And they were one-person crypts that a transfer table could roll in, and we could lock the door and nobody could access the body, because we know people are people, so we did our level best to secure everything and lock it down.
Right.
So, yeah.
For Michael Jackson, did you have to do press conferences?
Yes.
Did you have to do those?
Yeah, I have a pretty famous presence on the internet doing that.
My name is Craig Harvey. I'm the operations chief for the Los Angeles County Coroner and the coroner spokesperson. I'm here to announce that the coroner has concluded the autopsy for Mr. Michael Jackson.
As I said earlier, the media presence was just incredible. High number of people there from all over the world, not just local news, all over the world. And so when the day came that we were going to say anything to the media at all, we went outside. We had a captain from LAPD with us. My boss, the director at the time, came out, and we waded into this crowd of people with cameras blaring, and all I could do was just recite what we knew up to that point, because we still didn't have toxicology done, but we had to have police officers all around our building monitoring comings and goings, and there were people that tried to access the building and stuff like that. So it was just that crazy. It was just locked down. It's weird, and a lot of people don't think of this, but we're people who work in the coroner's office are people too. And so these kinds of things hit us hard as well. Michael Jackson was a special person, and so his passing left us all a little stunned that it would happen. So
wow,
we just tried to be the best and most helpful we could with the family, and just deal with it ourselves. But I still see footage, the footage of him practicing his routine for the upcoming tour he was going to be doing. I can feel it right here still to this day, that it just breaks me to see him.
Right. Just days before he died, yeah.
Because he's Michael Jackson, the Michael Jackson. That's the guy, and he looks so healthy and so on point. And then later on, people say, "Oh, well, look, he's skeletonized. He doesn't have any." No, he looked fully nourished to me. I mean, I saw him in the autopsy room. He looked healthy to me, and that's why I just don't understand why people were trash talking him, because you saw the dancing he was doing. That's no that's no easy
Right.
number to pull off unless you've got some good good training and fitness.
nutrition.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. What went through your head when you saw him after he had passed away? You talk about who it is. It must be surreal.
Oh, it absolutely was surreal. And remember when he was burned in the Pepsi
Right.
fire thing? And so he had some discrepancies in his scalp as far as where hair growth would be, and so he wore a wig most of the time. And then to see him with, at the time I saw him, I think the wig was just kind of off to the side a little bit. It wasn't on completely, it wasn't off completely, and off to the side. And it's like, that's not how I remember him. I don't want to remember him that way. I want to remember the guy that was dancing with his dancers on that stage.
So another big case that you worked was the death of Brittany Murphy, and that one got a lot of conspiracy theories on it because, then her husband dies of kind of their same thing 5 months later,
Right.
which made people think it wasn't an illness, that there was some conspiracy and that it was intentional. What do you remember from Brittany Murphy's death and all that?
Well, I know that there was it was just odd relationships between people. And, when the coroner investigator goes to a death scene, we're allowed to look places. We don't need a search warrant. We are investigating the cause of death of somebody. So we were opening drawers, they were opening drawers, and looking for medications that specifically belonged to Miss Murphy, because that's part of our evidence collection. But at the time, she was married to Simon Monjack, and he hadn't passed yet. But it was just weird. And then her father comes into the scene, and they'd been kind of estranged for years. And he was wanted to find out more about why she died. And she didn't necessarily believe in the coroner's cause of death. So he had some lab work done on a lab out of state somewhere.
He had his own pathologist do his own thing.
Yeah. And so that was like, okay, fine. And so then he starts telling everybody, oh yeah, well, my lab found, metals in her system, toxic metals or whatever. And it's like, okay, but so anyway.
And you guys didn't find that in...
No. And the problem with his lab work was it wasn't from an accredited lab. The specimens were not controlled, and it was just bad science from the get-go. It was just like somebody said, take a biscuit to the baker and say, bake this for me. And it's like, it has no idea what's in that biscuit. But
right.
That's kind of what it was. We just didn't know what we were dealing with, but we knew that it wasn't heavy metals, was what he was alleging.
Right. So what was the ultimate ruling on that one? Do you remember?
Well, I believe it had, as the primary was community-acquired pneumonia. She just was sick. And then when Simon Monjack came in 6 months later, or whatever it was, then everybody's suspicions got raised again. What's going on?
Because he died from the same thing, I think.
The same thing, right.
Crazy. It is a crazy coincidence.
Right.
But coincidences happen.
Right. And they were an unusual couple, so that they both went from the same circumstances, I don't find necessarily surprising. So we're in the house after Simon died, and we're looking for stuff, and Mom is there, and we're going through the drawers there, and this is the bed for Brittany and Simon slept in. But then she volunteers, that's my side of the bed.
Right.
So it's like, what? Are you really that close? It was just kind of an odd thing. We would still take the medications that belonged to Simon, but I don't know what she thought we were looking for or whatever. But then when she said it was her side of the bed, it's like, your son-in-law is...
You're sharing a bed with your son-in-law after your daughter died? That's
unique.
There were so many weird things like that with that case.
Yeah.
LA County Sheriff says he acted quickly to prevent graphic photos taken at the scene of Kobe Bryant's helicopter crash from being circulated.
What do you think? There was that whole scandal over, I think it was Sheriff's Department personnel supposedly taking photos of the Kobe Bryant crash scene and the bodies at that scene, and luckily they haven't been released because they jumped on it pretty fast. I think the department did, on clamping down.
A wise move on their part.
Yeah, that would anger a lot of people. I don't want to be a cynic, but I would be shocked if those don't eventually make their way online, because eventually someone's going to retire who has it and is going to see a way to cash in.
Or it's going to fall into somebody's hands, like, a family member or something will inherit it.
Sure.
And then,
box of files in the attic, and there they are.
Somebody
right.
will, put a phone call in to TMZ or something like that and say, hey, we got these, you interested? And,
right. Yeah.
Where's the money?
Yeah. But luckily that hasn't happened yet, which is...
No, it's good that it hasn't. But yeah, it's a concern. When I first started, we used Polaroid photos. That was our death scene documentation.
Right.
And then we moved on to digital cameras, and that was a slow process, but it did help. And the investigator takes as many photos as they like, but they document in their report how many photos they took, and then those photos are moved from their memory card onto the department's system, so that they're in a system that nobody can access from outside, only internally.
It's interesting you said Polaroids. The photos of Biggie's Suburban that he was shot in are Polaroid photos. I have those. I've used them over the years, showing the bullet holes and the what are they called? The rods that they use to do
Trajectory rods, yeah.
So you've worked as a technical advisor on a number of big television and film projects over the years. JAG, NCIS, Southland, which was an amazing show, Boomtown, and then some films like Street Kings, which Street Kings is so good and so overlooked by a lot of people.
Right.
And then Deja Vu, and Deja Vu was with Denzel Washington, yeah. And that's where you got to know Tony Scott.
Right.
How did you get into that world of a technical advisor?
It wasn't planned, but the chief medical examiner I worked for, we were concerned about misinformation, because the misinformation that's put out by media and TV shows and stuff like that comes back to haunt us. Because, my dad died yesterday. Why don't we have a cause of death yet? Why don't we have a death certificate?
Right.
And, I used to tell people that, I said, we do everything they do on TV, but we can't do it in 46 minutes and commercials.
Right.
We need a little bit more time to that. So that was our interest, was, can we try to correct some misinformation? Can we try to share what we do, where we do it? And that's kind of started it when set directors, set designers, and other people would contact us and say, I just need to figure out what an autopsy room looks like, so I can, because I've got to build one for this program or whatever. Right. So that's what started it all. It started to be very, very low key and fun. I mean, it was fun telling these people that, because they all had these misconceptions about what the coroner medical examiner does, and we were able to correct a lot of that.
It's interesting you say it's messed with your job, because it's also, there's a lot of prosecutors who will make the same complaint about these courtroom shows, because they have juries now that expect the big smoking gun evidence, and it's like, rarely do we have a case that's that obvious,
So when they called me and they said they'd like me to do some technical advising work on this new series, and this was in 2003, they hadn't even shot a roll of film yet. And they wanted me to work with their medical examiner, which was played by David McCollum. He was, Ducky, Dr. Mallard. We made arrangements to have David McCollum come to the office. And it was kind of a thrill to me, because I was a kid from Man from U.N.C.L.E. And he was the bee's knees as far as that show goes. I don't know if you remember Man from U.N.C.L.E. Great show. Two secret agents that worked for U.N.C.L.E. Anyway, he introduced him, and he was just as nice as could be. and just so curious. He was just incredibly curious. And that's, I think if you interviewed anyone from that show, they would tell you the same thing. He was constantly reading books. He was constantly asking questions. He was, and when he tired of us, he would go and he'd meet with, military medical examiners and talk shop and that kind of stuff. So it was a great experience. And then I got to go up to the studio while they were filming some of his stuff. And it was a lot of fun to do that and watch how the sausage is made.
Right.
So the stars, Emil Hirsch, Martin Sheen, I talked to him on the phone, David McCollum, Brian Dietzen, who's his second in command, Milo Ventimiglia, James Whitmore Jr. I loved his dad. He was in Them, 1954, one of my favorite sci-fis. CCH Pounder, he was on for NCIS New Orleans. Chris Maloney, Mariska Hargitay, Tony Scott, Brad Pitt, Tom Sizemore. I worked with Dick Wolf's writing staff.
Oh, amazing.
Whatever. I mean, he's like a god. I mean,
Right.
Some of the stuff that he produces is just incredible film. So I didn't turn down many opportunities if people had something. And then because our office is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, people would just call the office and say, hey, I'm cast in this movie and I don't know what a coroner does. And so
Sure.
I had members of my staff doing tours and talking to people.
Because basically, if you're a Brad Pitt, the script only gives you so much information.
Right. This is when he was filming Seven.
Oh,
fantastic. That's when he came to us. So he was just a nice guy, very quiet. He signed my secretary's coffee cup.
Nice.
She was thrilled. So yeah, it's just been a lot of fun. I mean, I don't try to get a big head. My interest was just, are they trying it as truthfully as possible, trying to tell the story.
Right.
And as Don Belisario told me, this is a TV show, not a documentary.
Right.
So, you had to let some stuff go. And when I dealt with writers, I would get scripts. I still get scripts from NCIS to review. But I just am very careful that I don't nitpick too much. It's like that cartoon where the professor's got this long arithmetic formula on the thing, and then there's a space. And then and then a miracle occurs.
Right. And
then it continues on with the thing there. So.
Right. Another really shocking death during your tenure was the suicide jumping off the Vincent Thomas Bridge in San Pedro was the famous director Tony Scott. It was shocking the way he chose to go, pulling over on the middle of the bridge and climbing over the security fence and jumping off it. For people who don't know, it's a very tall bridge.
It is.
I filmed under it before because it's such a picturesque, interesting area there in San Pedro with all the industrial stuff, and it's scary to drive over it. And then the thing that struck me about his death was that there was misinformation that came out initially, and it was that he had cancer, and that he jumped. That may have been one of the reasons he jumped, because he'd received a terminal cancer diagnosis. But then your office found no, he didn't have cancer.
Right.
So what was the deal with Tony Scott's death then? They said that he'd left notes behind for various friends and family, but they never disclosed what they said.
Right.
What did you guys determine? You just don't know why he did it?
I don't know. I'd have to see the report to see if it's even addressed.
Right.
Because the circumstances of his death are such that unless he left a note on the dashboard of the car or whatever, we would never see it.
Right.
And
and his cause of death was blunt force trauma from hitting the water and drowning.
And so that would so then the question becomes, how is it motive? Undetermined? Is it suicide? Is it accident? What's going to be? And so that remains to be seen if I ever got a chance to look at the autopsy report.
Right. But how did you feel, just on a personal level then, having worked with him?
Oh, I was sad. I mean, because he was such a talented man. And, Deja Vu was no slouch cast. It wasn't a reboot of Saved by the Bell or anything like that. It was legitimate stuff, and Denzel is electric.
Yeah, and it's a great movie.
Yeah, and doesn't like people watching him when he's working.
Really? That's a Denzel thing.
Because I'm like a geek when I'm on a set or whatever, watching what's going on. And so I'm like enthralled watching them to, do their character and all the little whatever. And then, so I wasn't really paying attention to anybody. And then somebody's like kneeling on the ground and they go, "Get down. He doesn't like to have anybody watch him while he's working." And it's like, okay, that seems kind of odd, but I'll humor him.
Everybody has their process.
Yeah, and I didn't want to interfere with that because he's he's a decent dude. I've seen his Equalizer films.
Yep. You like the Equalizer movies?
Oh,
I just watched the first one again yesterday. Yeah.
I like films where like Reacher and stuff like that, where there's a guy that can just kick everybody's ass without whatever. And I don't know. There's something that makes me feel very good that there are people like that in the world to deal with the dips.
What's the biggest mistake you see when you watch legal shows and crime shows?
Just the time frame of how fast things can get done. The show that kind of kicked it all off was CSI. Mm-hmm. And CSI was kind of shepherded by LA Sheriff criminalist Liz Devine. So, and Liz was the niece of the medical examiner who was at the office when I first started, Dr. Ron Kornblum. So she did the whole thing, but then I remember there's one episode that I watched, and I wasn't a big fan of it just because I had issues with some of it. But the people were walking in the backyard alongside a pool, and they see this red liquid that's running across the concrete and dripping down into the pool. And one of them bends down and he puts his finger in it, and then smells it. I don't even remember if he even tasted it, but it was like, I would never do that, ever.
Yeah, if you touch anything, you better have gloves on, and you never sniff anything ever.
Right, exactly, because you don't know what it is. But anyway, it was hummingbird nectar that had leaked out. And
lucky for him.
Yeah, lucky for him. But that's the kind of stuff that irritates me, because we just don't do things like that.
Yeah, I think CSI was probably one of the worst at the authenticity. I mean, you've got technicians running around with guns shooting bad guys. Like, that's just off the...
Yeah.
Did you ever chase a bad guy and shoot at him?
Not as a coroner, no.
Okay, good.
And to qualify that further, I never shot at anyone either, but I did carry a gun several times.
Oh, that's why?
I started, my first law enforcement gig was as a school police, lavatory lawman.
Oh, okay.
For Alhambra City Schools and Mountain View School District.
Oh, okay.
And then I went into the military, and I carried a gun most of the time. I was like law enforcement, and I taught weapons. So it was a big part of my life. And then when I got out, I went to college, finished college, and then I got hired by part-time by Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority. Mm-hmm. So I carried a gun in that as well. And I worked for Fraud Bureau for a while, for a year, carried a gun there too. But it's something that my dad always told me, don't pull it unless you're going to use it.
That's right.
We begin with a murder investigation that has stunned the entertainment world. Phil Hartman, who gained fame on Saturday Night Live, was found shot dead in his home, apparently killed by his wife, who then committed suicide.
So Phil Hartman's death, the comedic actor, was murdered by his wife in a murder-suicide. Tragic.
Right.
Tell me about, you worked, that was one that you were a part of.
Mrs. Hartman had a blood alcohol level of 0.12 and also showed evidence of cocaine usage. The gunshot wounds in Mr. Hartman were 2 to the head, 1 to the upper body, mid-torso area.
Investigator Dan Aiken from our office was assigned primary, and we went out to the location, and LAPD wouldn't let us in to the building. Now, the way I read the law, the only one who has a legal right to be there is the coroner. So, so anyway, it was a bit of frustration on our part.
Why weren't they letting you in?
Because they're doing their investigation, and I certainly understand that. But there's nothing that I'm going to do that's going to interfere with their investigation.
Right.
And we're not going to move the body. We're not going to do anything until they're ready for that to happen. Because, yeah, we understand about the need to have time to process the scene. But what tore it for me is we're sitting out in the car on the curb waiting for the go signal, and like 3 or 4 LAPD bike officers show up, take their bikes into the yard, leaning up against the thing, and they on into the house. And it's like, what does a bike officer have to do with
Right.
this death?
Right.
So that's when we said, okay, this is not going to happen. And so we had long conversations with both LAPD and LA Sheriff that, we need to do better here, guys, because you can't do this. And so I'm in the room. Dan Aiken's doing the scene investigation or whatever, doing his thing, and I'm watching the activity going on, and everybody's into everything. They're opening drawers and they're opening cabinets and they're rummaging through, and it's like, wait a minute, if there's a bottle of anything in the place that's a prescription, that's ours. That belongs to the coroner, and so I watched a detective take a bottle of medication and then palm it into his jacket pocket. And I thought, okay, time out. So I went over to Dan and I said, if there was medication here, you'd want that, wouldn't you? And he goes, well, hell yeah. And I said, you need to go talk to that detective. And he got it back. And detective
Wow.
didn't put up a fight or whatever. But, Bryn Hartman had been taking a Zoloft.
That was the wife.
Yeah, it was the wife. And so anything that was something that was mind-altering was of interest to the coroner. Because, yeah, I know she shot herself. I know she shot him. But is there anything else going on in her
Right.
body that might have contributed to this thing? And I think ultimately that's what they found out. Because I think she shot him and then she left and then came back.
I think cocaine was involved. I believe she left, and she had a male friend that I think she either went to his place and then came back, or called him and he came over. It was something like that. And then ultimately she ended up barricading herself inside the house, and the police are there, and then she shoots herself. She shot Phil while he was asleep.
Right.
In his bed, which is
Yeah.
terrible. Is there anything else you remember from the scene? I mean, obviously Phil's there.
Just that there were like 12 detectives in there bumping into each other, not counting the bike cops. So yeah, I just remember that, and I thought I wanted to see, because I was not a person that pulled a lot of the celebrity cases to investigate. It was either given to somebody else for whatever reason, or it happened after I left the office. I was off for the day, and then celebrity call came in. So I didn't get to do a lot. I mean, I did Steve Allen, I did Chick Hearn.
The announcer for the Lakers, yeah.
On cases like the Hartmans, I wanted to see for myself, because I knew how detectives can be. Because, just run-of-the-mill everyday detectives can sometimes be impossible to work with, because they have this different sense of who's in charge. And they think that we're down here and they're up here. And it's actually, we're in this together, guys. We have the same goal in mind.
Well, it's not exactly the place you'd expect to find a Hollywood starlet, and that is at the morgue doing janitorial work.
But it's just the dirty work Lindsay Lohan will have to start to perform as part of her community service.
This is a somewhat humorous story from your career. So back in 2011, Lindsay Lohan got sentenced. Her sentence was community service, but she was ordered to serve it at the LA County Coroner's.
Yes.
Your offices.
Yes.
So talk about that. What happened with that in your experience?
We had a program, I don't know if they still have it, but we had a program called Community Service. And we would bring in people who were supposed to do something other than do time. They had to exhaust the time, but they had to work on something. So in this case, custodial is what most of them did: cleaning the bathrooms, mopping the floors, emptying the trash, that kind of stuff. And that's what she was detailed to do. She'd come to the office and do her time, and then she's done. She's released. But apparently she had a little bit of trouble with telling time. And so, I think the first day she showed, she was late and she was sent home. And then I think there was an episode where she tried to have donuts delivered to the office, and we turn those away as well. And so once she got to the rhythm of how we do business and that we were just going to treat her like everybody else, she was fine. She was actually very kind, and you know, she was a pleasure to be around. But she just had, you know, comes from a different background. It was not. She's in film and stuff like that. It's not like they're in reality.
Did she have to see any kind of the gross things? Did she see any of the bodies or any of that?
Well, they all work on the service floor.
So you see them getting rolled by, and you can see there's windows into all the rooms.
Yeah, we're a pretty busy department, and during the day, that's when we do most of our activity. So we just do what we do, and if, you know, there's a body in the hallway being processed, if there's a body rolling from the crypt to the autopsy suite or whatever, that's what it is. We don't sugarcoat anything, and we tell everybody that this is what's going to go on there. If you have a problem, let us know. But we find that, I always found that when you take somebody into that environment, into the crypts, into the autopsy room, if you explain to them what's going on, what's happening and stuff like that, they seem to be able to reconcile it in their head, and it doesn't become gross, I'm going to barf anymore. It's like, this is fascinating. I've never seen anything like this before. And that was what I was hoping I would get the response from them. Because one of her jobs was to empty trash cans in the offices in the area where I worked, which was one whole wing of the department. And so I would always jokingly tell people that Lindsay Lohan empties my trash. That's how good I am. So, but anyway, she was nice.
Okay. Phil Spector.
He's dead.
So tell me about the Phil Spector and Lana Clarkson thing. And before we get into it, I'll just say really quick, I met Lana Clarkson about a week before she died. I was pretty new to LA at the time, and I was working on what I would describe as a micro-budget vampire movie that was being paid for on these producers like credit cards. It was literally like what we call a credit card movie. And we needed a scream queen for one of the scenes, just a day player part. We needed one day, come down, we'll be in like one shot, and then you'll get your money and you're done. And he knew about Lana Clarkson, and so I remember me and this executive producer, I was like a second assistant director on the film. Me and this EP went down to this hotel near LAX where there was a fan convention happening. And people signing autographs. It's all B-listers, D-listers and stuff. And Lana Clarkson was there, and he knew she was going to be there. And this is where I can go. I can take her the script and get a hold of her. And so I remember she was at her booth, and we talked to her. And the two things I remember about her: she was very tall, and she was very nice.
Yes,
she was a very kind person.
That's what I've read about her.
Super kind person. And he gave her the script, and she was interested. And then we never heard from her. And when you're making a movie, sometimes you just lose track of the real world. You're just so wrapped up in what you're doing. And I remember knowing that Phil Spector had been arrested for murdering somebody. And then one day, this executive producer calls me, and he's in a panic. He's just gone to the grocery store. And while he's checking out, he picks up a tabloid, and he sees Lana Clarkson on the cover. And then he realized, holy shit, that's the person that Phil Spector shot. And now he's panicking.
Right.
And of course, he's thinking of himself, oh, I bet our script is in evidence now. It was probably in her car. And I'm like, I don't think the police care about a screenplay for a vampire movie. So what do you remember from the Phil Spector?
Again, this was another case where, because of the celebrity status, I said I need to go out there. And I took Ed Winter, my assistant chief, but I think then he was a lieutenant. But I took him out there as well, because he needed to see how these scenes function, and that sometimes things don't go according to how they should go, because sometimes, like I said, the police can be difficult to work with. And I think Alhambra PD was handling, but then it took her over to the sheriff's department. So we were dealing with sheriffs. So we went out to the scene, and I remember in the driveway, at the end of one of the driveway, he had all these small statues, Disney statues, all along this driveway. And I thought, that's kind of odd. But so I...
What, like of the dwarves, or what?
Yeah, I think it was the dwarves, might have been Cinderella as well, or whatever. So we went to the door. I don't know if that was the front door. I think it was the front door of the place, and the scene hadn't really been processed totally yet. So we were very careful about what we were going to do. So I didn't venture very far into the house because it's their crime scene.
And she was shot in kind of the foyer, the kind of the front
Right,
area.
she was right there.
So she was still there in the chair.
She was still there in the chair when I saw her. And, you know, my opinion was when I first saw her that it looked like she'd been placed in the chair, like she'd been moved to this and then sat in the chair because her legs were like out straight like this. And it looked like somebody might have put her into that position.
Yeah.
To maybe cover up the rest of their crime or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting just because of the circumstances of it, and that, you know, I grew up on Phil Spector music.
Right.
So he was a name to me. I mean, it's not like I didn't know who he was. So it's interesting, but it's good training for my staff, my new staff. He was definitely a weird motor scooter. Yeah.
A weird motor scooter, he was.
Yes.
So you were satisfied with the outcome of that case?
Yeah,
There, even though it took, I think, 2 trials.
Yeah, because I think we recovered, the criminalists recovered a piece of dental tooth, whatever.
Yeah, her teeth were on the floor. Like
Yeah.
some of her teeth were shot out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was tragic. Nice lady. This is an interesting one because this gets into some conspiracies. So the kind of right-wing lightning rod media owner, Andrew Breitbart.
Yes.
Died of natural causes. That was like a heart attack or something like that. But you tell me about your experience working that case.
Well, I was taking calls as normal, and I get this call from, I think there was 2 people on the line, and they were associates of Mr. Breitbart, and they were asking me questions, some of which I did not have the answer to yet, and but they started hinting at a conspiracy rather than I'm just got high blood pressure and I crashed. I mean, that's pretty much what it was. But everything's a conspiracy, and you know the big secret is underway and stuff like that.
So they wanted it to seem like he had been murdered.
Well, they wanted something else so that they could sensationalize it for their publication.
Right.
And, but it worked out. It was just like, no, I have high blood pressure and I crashed. And I didn't even know who Breitbart was.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not my field of expertise.
Yeah.
Well, there are a couple of cases that really stand out, and one is this case of a decedent who had died and been buried in Florida. His next of kin, wife and son, got him exhumed and moved him from Florida to Arizona, reinterred. Then they decided that wasn't good enough, that something's suspicious going on. So they had him exhumed again, except this time they didn't go back. He came to California, came to Rose Hills and Whittier.
And when you say suspicious, what do you, like what? Who knows what they...
It's just the same old stuff. I mean, nobody ever dies a natural death. Everybody's been secretly murdered by the,
right.
you know, the secret organization or something like that.
Right.
So he was a Navy veteran. God's sakes, let that man rest in peace. But they didn't, and they were having to solicit people for money to pay for all of this stuff, because it's, you know, a lot of these places don't do it for cheap. We're the same way. We don't do it for cheap. So they contacted our office, and they got a hold of one of my senior lieutenants, Fred Corral, and talked with him. And he seemed to think that there was enough to hang our hat on. What they were concerned with is, who is this in the casket? They wanted him identified. So we said, okay, we will exhume him and bring him to the office, and we will identify him. And it was all handled beautifully. Fred did a nice job. And our policy is, when we exhume a body, when we're done with it, it goes right back to that cemetery and goes back into the plot that was taken out of. They didn't like that idea. They didn't want that to happen at all. And, you know, the folks at Rose Hills were so cool, so nice. And so they started disputing the identity. I think we identified him by x-rays. And Fred busted his hump to get those x-rays from wherever he had to get them from so that we'd have something to compare to the body. And so they were just being difficult. And then I think we had a meeting with the medical examiner at that time, the chief medical examiner, and they lodged their concerns or whatever. So basically it boiled down to this, is that if, even though we've identified him, you're saying that's not your loved one. Now bear in mind, he's virtually skeletonized by this time. He's not a freshly embalmed body. So he didn't look like he's supposed to look.
Right.
So, but we identified things inside the casket, like a knit caftan comforter kind of a thing that was in there that matched what they said should be in the casket.
Right.
So then it was like, well, we don't think that's who he is. We're not going to sign off on anything or whatever. And we said, okay, fine, we'll make him a doe. If he's a doe, you don't have any jurisdiction over the body. We can do whatever we want with it. Which is like broke their spirit.
Right.
And ultimately, I think...
Yeah, it means you're not related to him anymore, therefore
that's right.
he's
so
not your responsibility.
We will control the disposition, which is what we're entitled to do. So that worked out to their frustration and our benefit. So another interesting case I handled was a diver diving off an oil platform out there in the whatever. And he was down like 740 feet or something like that. And we were able to get an ROV from one of the company that was doing the surveillance of, they do it on a regular basis to make sure nothing's leaking out of the oil derrick. So we got the ROV to go down, and I have a video of this whole process where the ROV grabs a hold of him and brings him up to the surface, and we recover him and bring him into the office. So that was, I thought, pretty fascinating. I'm a scuba diver myself, so this kind of stuff was just incredible to me, because sometimes people go in the water and they never come out.
Right.
Yeah. So it was nice to recover him.
So because he was so far down, it was sending a person down would have been...
Oh, there's no way. I mean, that's beyond recreational diving and probably pushing the limits of technical diving.
Right. So better to send a robot down.
Right. And it worked well. I mean, because it had little graspy hands on it, and it was able to grab a hold of him and move him.
Wow.
So, but it was interesting because he's laying there on the bottom just like he's sleeping on the bottom. I mean, he wasn't, he had a little bit of skeletonization for where the mass didn't cover here, where the fish would eat, but it was pretty good.
How long have you been down there? I guess a while.
Several months. I'd have to look at it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he was down long enough to get some carnivore activity on him.
Wow. What are the challenges? Because you mentioned that Noguchi was the previous medical examiner before you got there, was kind of coined the coroner to the stars.
Yeah.
And the department is kind of has that same moniker too. It's the coroner to the stars, the LA County Coroner, because of course so many celebrities go through there.
Right.
What are the challenges of dealing with a celebrity case in general when there's all this attention on it?
Well, more today, probably more so with the advent of TMZ.
Right.
It changes how things are approached very quickly, because once we get notified of the celebrity, chances are TMZ is already aware of it, or other media outlets are already aware of it, and they're already putting information out there, right, wrong, or indifferent. The information is going out there. And so we generally respond pretty quickly with those kinds of cases. And we don't do it because of who they are. We do it because it impacts our work. So we don't want to have to interfere with our staff doing their day-to-day business. We want to get this person in, processed, examined, and released as soon as we possibly can.
Right. And I saw a former spokesman for the coroner office there said that they would expedite a famous case just to get the office back to normal, because you would get so in and it would almost shut the department down. You'd be getting so many calls from media and members of the public because of someone like a Michael Jackson coming through.
That sounds like something I would even say.
Yeah.
Because you just try to explain to people, because you've got other people out there who may or may not have anything to do with the coroner's office. And they're like, well, what about my loved one? I want to get my loved one out of there. And it's like, it has nothing to do so much with that as it is, as you pointed out, getting the office back to normal. Stop the phone calls or reduce the number of phone calls. And just focus on what we need to be able to do.
Yeah, it's not favoritism because it's a famous person. It's just
right.
madhouse.
It's famous because of what they do to our workload.
Right. So what would your job as a chief investigator and the chief of operations? How would you work with the medical examiner? Like, how do you guys coordinate?
Okay. Well, I'm responsible for the investigations division, which has upwards of 25, 30, a little over that. When I was there, I think they're up to 50 now. But I direct their activity, or my lieutenants would direct their activity and assign people the field calls, and they would go out and conduct their investigation. So that was my biggest responsibility, is to make sure that those things got handled promptly, and then meet the detectives at the scene and go from there.
And talk about doing press conferences, because you were often the guy, especially if it was a high-profile case, I would see you out there with all the microphones in front of you, and you were the guy that had to go out and address the media. And how was that handled?
Well, the coroner's office in general had a kind of an unwritten policy that we don't talk to the media. But I learned over the course of my tenure that sometimes talking a little bit to the media can save you a lot of headaches and a lot of issues down the line. So myself and my then assistant chief, Ed Winter, would take the time to say a few words, and the media is happy with what they get, because it's all that's available at that particular time, and then we can go on about our business. But yeah, it's just generally, if I have a half a dozen media outlets show up on our front porch at the coroner's office, I'm like, I'm going to have to do something. Unless there's a security hold put on by the law enforcement agency, there's nothing stopping me from making any kind of a statement to the media. And you don't want to ignore the fact that what seems like just another case for the coroner may have very local impact that you're not aware of, that this is somebody within that community or whatever. So the better part of valor is to just go ahead and talk to them, tell them what you can, and then send them on their way.
Right. Again, Kathy Scott, that journalist in Vegas who worked the Tupac, she was the crime reporter there for one of the Vegas papers. Tupac case, they tried to do a media blackout. The detectives didn't want to talk to any press. And she says the problem is that doesn't make it go away. It makes it worse, because it just makes us as the media try harder to get information.
They didn't want to talk about the Tupac case. They thought, in their infinite wisdom, that if they didn't talk to the media, that the story would die. It actually, what are they hiding? And so it actually fueled it. And more reporters were coming to town and stuff. It actually fueled it. They would have been better off just being straight up. And the story, that's when it goes away.
Your tactic was just give them something, and then they know, okay, you've told us what we can. There's really no sense in continuing to try to get more information. They're obviously not going to give us more, but at least they gave us something.
Right. And you can see examples, fairly recent examples, the Guthrie disappearance. I thought maybe we're a little too chatty at the very beginning here when we don't really know a lot. And it just seemed to spiral out of control. I think the sheriff's got it under control now, and but it was a learning experience for me, for us, on the Michael Jackson investigation, because we never anticipated something that huge and what it would do to our operation. So I used to do presentations to like the Coroners Association about, what do you do when you have a Michael Jackson, or, when your case is a Michael Jackson. And we just learned some things, and from that's kind of become standard procedure for our office. You don't have to tell them what you don't know. You don't have to make up stuff. You don't have to guess. You just tell them what you know at that particular juncture. And the other little bit of preparation for this is that you say, okay, it's 9 o'clock now. We'll be out here at 12 o'clock for the next briefing, so that they know that there's going to be an attempt to additional communication.
Sure. And you guys can leave for now.
Right.
Because there's not going to be anything for the next 3 hours, right?
Although they won't leave. They never leave. So.
They never leave. The Coroners doesn't still have the gift shop, do they?
No, the previous medical examiner, before the one that's currently in charge, decided to shut it all down. And I still get emails from people whining, complaining, and asking about the gift shop.
Wanting swag to be able to get it?
Yeah.
Did they just think it was in poor taste, or what was the reason?
Well, I think that was part of it. And the other thing was the department never really gave Skeletons in the Closet the full backbone to get the information out there, to get the merchandise out there and make it accessible, because you've been to the coroner's office. It's not a lot of parking.
Right.
The space available was pretty small. I mean, it literally started in a closet, probably about this wide here. And it just grew until it took over one large room in the older building that we took over eventually, the old administration building. So if they'd have really found a retail site, because even mail order was okay, but I think people like to see what it is you have.
Right.
If they could have found a retail site,
like off-site across the street or something.
Right,
yeah.
or some place that's accessible to the public. I see parking is very important. Right. So we didn't have a lot of that.
Well, if you have that old LA County Coroner swag out there, it's worth more now because you can't get it anymore.
I had another case that came through the office. I didn't handle it, but it was a well-known comedian. I remember him from a performance he did on the David Letterman show. And I just thought he was incredibly funny. He had a deadpan delivery, very dry kind of a thing. And he was just one of my faves. And then when I saw him come in, he came in as a gunshot wound suicide. But one of the things that I always remember about it, because in addition to him being an incredible comedian, he had posted signs, taken paper and a magic marker and written signs like, this way to the body,
Really?
Yeah, if you think this is, I think I have them someplace, but I have copies of the.
Like in his home?
In where he was staying at, yeah.
Wow.
He was married, but I don't think he was estranged from his wife, I believe.
Do you remember who it was?
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to say?
Not on record, I don't think so. Because I think suicide notes are kind of personal, and when you attach a name to it, and it's like, I don't know how to do that.
So he had put signs up just intentionally, knowing
he was going to shoot himself? Knowing he was going to shoot himself.
Kind of?
But he was putting up funny direction signs, and I have
like the final gag.
Yeah, he left money for the coroner investigator for his troubles and handling his death and stuff like that.
Wow.
It was only like $10 or whatever,
right.
But still, it was just like, this guy was getting ready to do this, yet he had the foresight to just create, I think, hysterically funny signs that were basically telling people what was going on.
You still have one of those signs?
Hmm?
You said you still have one? Okay, so you found the paperwork, these signs that this comedian that we're not going to name left around his house. Can you hold up a few favorites?
Well, I don't know. Every time I look at them, I just think that this is postmortem brilliance.
It's your kind of humor. And you got to respect that it was the last joke he ever, the last bit he ever did, basically.
Yeah. I don't know if I should count these so you have an idea of just how many from the moment you walk in the place.
Wow. I mean, you spent time on them.
Yeah. Can I just go through them?
Yeah.
Sign on the front door. Caution, dead body inside.
Jeez.
Note to crime scene photographer, please airbrush crow's feet around my eyes. That is, if I still have eyes.
Wow.
OJ was here.
Trying to pin it on OJ.
By the way, I think the elevator's broken. Sucks for you, I weigh 200 pounds. before soul leaves. I'll be talking to God soon. Need anything? Zoloft is overrated.
Wow.
I would like my organs donated to Zuno Sushi. And the sorry about the mess, and there's a tip. We don't keep it. It goes to his family.
Right.
On the bright side, I'm TiVoing all the shows I'm going to miss. You remember TiVo?
I do remember TiVo, yeah.
Yeah, about that lease. Seriously, how's my hair look? Then he listed family members to contact, and
jeez.
But I just this one always stuck with me because he was just so funny, so talented.
Yeah.
He's on David Letterman, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
You know, these people who are comedians, they don't suffer fools gladly. So if somebody's going to be on their show, they've got to be good at what they're doing.
Right.
I just thought that was kind of funny because this man's going to turn around and shoot himself, but he's a comedian and he was going to be funny right out the door, and he was. I just, he posted like, I'm cleaning my oven right now, think like, what? Why would somebody do that? But he had that sense of humor that I loved. It was dark and black, and I loved that sense of humor on people. So anyway, it was just one that touched me deeply.
Yeah.
Because he was so good, and that he'd left, and like I said, I have a dark sense of humor anyway when somebody would take the time to do that.
Right.
They've given it some careful thought. It's not like a split-second decision they made.
And I think someone that worked the career that you kind of have to have a dark sense of humor. There's a thing, cop humor is its own form of humor. It's kind of a gallows humor.
Right.
A dark humor. But it's a coping mechanism, psychological coping mechanism for the stuff you guys see every day.
Right.
Right? You have to, you can't internalize it too much.
No, but you do see some funny stuff.
Right.
And, what do you do with that? Right. So you certainly don't take it home and ruminate on it.
Yeah. Yep. You have a very interesting career.
I enjoyed it. I tell people it's the most fun I've ever had without laughing.
That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah.